In a quaint village nestled along the serene banks of the Nile River, life moved at a peaceful pace, untouched by the bustling cities far beyond its boundaries. The village was a harmonious blend of nature and humanity, where fields of green stretched endlessly and birds' melodies filled the air. Here lived a young girl named Nyoka, a 20-year-old with eyes that sparkled like the stars and a smile that could brighten even the darkest of nights. Despite the challenges life had thrown her way, Nyoka remained a beacon of light and hope. Nyoka lived with her mother, Amuna, a resilient woman who had carried the family through many storms, and her younger brother, Dang, a playful boy of 10. Their home, a modest mud hut with a thatched roof, stood on the outskirts of the village, overlooking the river. Life hadn't been easy for them, especially after the loss of Nyoka's father, when Dang was just an infant. Amuna had taken up weaving and farming, working tirelessly to provide for her children. Nyoka had inherited her mother's strength and determination. She spent her days helping in the fields, fetching water, and ensuring Dang went to school. Despite the hard work, she cherished her life, her family, and the tranquil beauty of their village. A request at dusk. One warm evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the village, Nyoka was playing with her friends near the river. The water reflected the fiery orange of the sky, and laughter echoed as the children splashed and played. The serenity of the moment was interrupted by Amuna's voice calling out from the distance, "Nyoka, it's time to come home." Waving goodbye to her friends, Nyoka hurried toward her mother, her bare feet kicking up dust as she ran. Amuna stood outside their hut, her face etched with worry. "Nyoka, I need your help," Amuna said, her tone serious. She held out a woven basket, covered with a clean cloth. "Take this food to Kofi, the old man who lives at the edge of the village. He's been unwell, and I promised to send him dinner." Nyoka hesitated. She had heard tales about the path to Kofi's house, stories of wild animals, eerie spirits, and strange occurrences. The villagers often whispered about the dangers of venturing there after dark. "Mama," Nyoka began, her voice trembling, "can't we wait until morning?" Amuna placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I understand your fear, my child. But Kofi is alone and in need. We cannot let fear stop us from doing what's right. Be brave, Nyoka." With a deep breath, Nyoka nodded. "I'll do it, Mama. I promise to be careful." Taking the basket, she set off on the narrow, winding path that led to Kofi's house. The journey into the night. As Nyoka walked, the sounds of the bustling village faded, replaced by the quiet murmur of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. The path was lined with tall grass and thorny bushes that seemed to reach out toward her. She clutched the basket tightly, her heart pounding with every step. Shadows danced in the dim light of her small lantern, and every rustle made her jump. Nyoka tried to focus on her task, but the stories she had heard played over and over in her mind. They spoke of wandering spirits that lured travelers into the forest and wild animals that prowled in the dark. The unease grew stronger as the path became narrower and more secluded. Suddenly, she heard a rustling sound in the bushes. Her heart raced as she stopped and held her breath, straining to listen. "It's just the wind," she whispered to herself, trying to calm her nerves. But then, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, and a low growl broke the silence. A wild dog stepped onto the path, its teeth bared. Nyoka froze, her instinct screaming at her to run. But instead, she remembered the advice her father had given her years ago about facing wild animals. Slowly, she crouched, picked up a stone, and threw it near the dog. The noise startled it, and after a tense moment, the dog retreated into the bushes. Relieved but shaken, Nyoka hurried on, her feet moving faster. In the distance, she finally saw a faint, flickering light, the glow of Kofi's lantern. The sight filled her with relief, and she quickened her pace. Kofi's house. Kofi's house was a small, weathered structure at the edge of the village, surrounded by tall trees. Nyoka knocked on the wooden door, her knuckles trembling. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Kofi. The old man, with his deeply wrinkled skin and snow-white hair, greeted her with a smile. "Good evening, Nyoka," he said in a raspy voice. "What brings you here at this hour?" "My mother sent me with some food for you," Nyoka replied, holding up the basket. Despite her fear, she couldn't help but notice the warmth in his eyes. Kofi stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. "Come in, child. It's dangerous to be out alone at night." Nyoka hesitated but eventually stepped inside. The house was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture, books, and curious trinkets. A fire burned in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Nyoka handed the basket to Kofi, who thanked her profusely. As they sat by the fire, Kofi offered Nyoka some tea. "Stay for a while," he said. "It's not safe to walk back now. The night is full of dangers." Nyoka considered his words. The thought of returning alone frightened her, so she agreed to stay for a little while. Kofi began telling her stories of his youth, tales of distant lands, battles fought, and treasures found. Nyoka listened intently, her earlier fear replaced by curiosity. A night of suspense. As the hours passed, Nyoka began to feel drowsy. Kofi noticed and offered her a bed in the corner of the room. "Rest here tonight," he said. "You can leave in the morning when it's safer." Reluctantly, Nyoka agreed. The bed was small but comfortable, and she lay down, trying to ignore the unease that lingered in the pit of her stomach. Her eyes wandered to a heavy lock on the bedroom door, and a shiver ran down her spine. "Kofi, why do you have such a big lock on the door?" she asked. Kofi chuckled softly. "To keep the wind from blowing it open," he replied. But something in his tone made Nyoka doubt his words. That night, as the fire dimmed and the house grew silent, Nyoka found herself unable to sleep. Strange noises filled the air, the creaking of the house, the whisper of the wind, and a faint, unfamiliar sound that sent chills down her spine. Just as she began to drift off, a loud creak startled her awake. The bedroom door was slowly opening. Nyoka sat up, her heart pounding. In the doorway stood Kofi, his face hidden in shadows. "What's wrong, Kofi?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kofi didn't reply. Instead, he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a click. The lock turned, and panic surged through Nyoka. "Kofi, what are you doing?" she cried, backing away. "Escape." Nyoka's mind raced as Kofi moved closer. Desperation took over, and her eyes darted around the room for an escape route. She spotted a small window, partially hidden by a curtain. Without thinking, she ran to it, struggling to open the latch. Kofi's footsteps grew louder, and she could feel his presence looming behind her. With a burst of adrenaline, Nyoka managed to force the window open. She scrambled through it, falling to the ground outside. Ignoring the pain from her scraped hands and knees, she ran as fast as she could, the darkness enveloping her. She didn't look back, too terrified of what she might see. The path blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she kept running, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, the lights of her village appeared in the distance, and relief washed over her. She stumbled into her home, collapsing into her mother's arms. The aftermath. For days, Nyoka was haunted by the events of that night. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop thinking about Kofi. When Amina gently urged her to talk, Nyoka finally shared everything. Her mother listened, her face pale with shock. Word spread through the village, and the elders decided to investigate. When they reached Kofi's house, they found it abandoned, with no trace of the old man. The heavy lock on the bedroom door remained a mystery, and Kofi's disappearance only deepened the enigma. Though the village returned to its usual peace, Nyoka would never forget that fateful night. It was a reminder that even in the most serene places, darkness could linger, and bravery was the only light strong enough to overcome it.